Tēnā koutou Aotearoa, New Zealand, and welcome to the BYC. It is wonderful to be with you today at the Export Beer Garden studio, and what an incredible culmination to the Ashes series. Magnificent series, amazing scenes, twists and turns, mistakes and escapes, patriotic, compelling, contagious, addictive cricket that flies in the face of an inexorable shift to short-form slog ball home run derby, money man cricket. Dylan Cleaver, your thoughts?
I can't compete with those thoughts, but no, it was wonderful, and I spent yesterday wondering if I was relieved it was over and my sleep patterns can get back to normal, or whether I actually was feeling a little bereft. And I think I'm still feeling a little bereft. I mean, that was, if you include the World Test Championship final, which I do, that was 6 tests in 8 weeks, and it was just a glorious way of A, watching the sport that I love and can't get enough of, and B, forgetting that I am stuck in the middle of an absolutely miserable winter. So, yeah, it was fantastic. And everything about it, the inconclusiveness of it, the partial referendum on Bazball, the partial emasculation of the Australian sporting ideals, it was just fantastic. Couldn't get enough of it.
And I reckon we should absolutely get into the significance of this series. And you said something there, and it reminded me of something that I saw Brendan McCullum say during the week, which was, as a Kiwi, he's always looked at the Ashes from afar and gone, man, it would be good to be a part of that. And now he's a witness. He's deeply involved in it. I mean, for God's sake, he's almost renamed it. And he being part of it is something quite incredible. But the point that he made was, it sucks that it has to end. How good would it be if we went around again? I mean, we haven't reached a conclusion. The series is tied. Shouldn't we keep going till there's a winner? And I know that there's sort of a ridiculousness around that, but that's kind of the feeling that I have. Yeah,
and look, let's not forget that it was actually a terrific game of cricket. We're already sort of talking about the series in a broader context, but that 5th test at the Oval was a fantastic game of cricket. England batted first in reasonably tricky conditions, got 283 thanks to some slogging from the tail. Australia replied, they looked in big trouble, but then they rescued themselves as well, got to 295. England then Bazballed the hell out of it for 395. It didn't give Australia a prayer of chasing down, I think, 370 odd to win. And then all of a sudden I didn't give England a prayer when they were 134 without loss, and eventually falling 49 runs short, but all sorts of controversy tied up in that 334 all out in the final innings. Inevitably, Stuart Broad taking a wicket with his last ball in Test cricket, just as he hit the last ball he faced in Test cricket for 6.
So good. And, on that it is a great stat from Chris, not Chris Broad, of course, that's his old man, but yeah, magnificent. I think the only other cricketer to hit a 6 off his last ball was a guy called the Black Diamond, Wayne Daniel, who was a South African player and like a burly fast bowler, I think, who reached to the heavens, almost looked back over his shoulder when he bowled. And the other person is Glenn Maxwell, who is, of course, not yet retired, but did hit a 6 off his last ball in Test cricket. I did have a quick look too, and there's not very many bowlers, not very many players that seem to have got a wicket with their last ball. Malinga being one, Glenn McGrath, Dennis Lilly, and of course our very own Richard Hadley, who got 5 for 17 and got Devon Malcolm out. Devon Malcolm, who had a blinder in that Test match, said that he was more proud of being Richard Hadley's last wicket than his performance in the Test match, which says something. I don't know if that's how the Australians will be feeling being on the back end of a Stuart Broad winning spell.
Yeah, just a little bit more Devon Malcolm nerdery. He got a pair in that Test, dismissed by Hadley both times, and took this official scorecard into the New Zealand dressing rooms at the end and got it signed by Sir Richard of Canterbury. So
that's so good. But yeah, like what you said, Dylan, it was again, the series. I mean, we've just had 24 incredible days and one really frustrating day of cricket, and just an amazing series and another thriller. And it's another Test match where both teams score about 300 in each innings, and that seems to make it kind of perfect, especially when you have a team like England that are prepared to put the hammer down and just make the most of the 80 overs that they've decided that they're going to bat.
Yeah, look, how they went about their business in the second innings was really interesting, because it followed on from Australia's first innings, and there's been a lot of noise about this, and really interesting noise, and that they they went very slowly. I think Labuschagne might have scored 8 off 80-something deliveries. Kawaja got 47 off 153 deliveries. And Mark Taylor, who I don't rate as the world's sharpest analyst, but he's been in that cauldron several times. He's captained in that cauldron. He just said something really interesting that pointed to perhaps how we've even underestimated how much Bazball has got under the Australian skin. He felt that those two were batting almost as a middle finger to England. Like, rather than actually batting properly and naturally, they were actually out there trying to defy Bazball and saying, hey, there's another way of doing this and we're going to show you. It might not be pretty, but it's damn effective. And I think he might have had a point, actually. There was seemingly no valid reason to bat quite that passively without intent, other than to say, you guys can do that shit you're doing, we're doing it our way.
Which is sort of right. Yeah, I think the principle is right. Like what you just said at the end, that does sound right. But I think the point is, and the point you're making is, but Kawaja and Labuschagne don't bat like that normally. No. Like what are the, they swung the pendulum too far. We should go through a few of the things that caught our eye during the game. I mean, I think we have to talk about this ball change. I mean, this was a ball change that wreaked havoc. And of course, before we get started, really important to note, nothing to do with England either. Umpire's decision, completely third party. As I say, nothing to do with any skullduggery or anything untoward, but did seem to have a pretty huge bearing on the match. Yeah,
there's a couple of it was Kawaja's helmet that put it out of shape, not England. So, but the point I want to make is that there is a delicious irony about Australia complaining about the changing nature of the ball, really coming hard on the heels of a certain sandpaper incident in South Africa. But the thing that is also really delicious about it is they are dead set right. They have a real valid point to be upset about here, and that when they were doing those still shots side by side of the ball, you could clearly read the lettering on the ball that they changed to. It was so much darker. It was I think Kawaja said as soon as he hit the first one, it felt like the hardest ball they'd used all series. And it's meant to be replacing a ball that's 30-something overs old, maybe even 40-something overs old. It was crazy, and just again one of those incidents that has such a huge bearing on the series result. I don't think if that ball hadn't gone out of shape and England had to bowl with it through to 80 overs, I do not think they would have won that final test.
It didn't look like it, it didn't look like it the way it was going. Yeah, Kawaja said the ball looked like it was 8 overs old, and he could see the writing on both sides of the ball, which is ominous. I heard someone else say, when we talked about Richard Hadley before, that it looked like a ball that Richard Hadley had been looking after him in his own personal collection, because the seam was so pronounced. It had been bowled only on the seam, and the shiny sides had been completely untouched. And of course, Hadley, famous for the ball only ever landing on the seam. So, yeah, look, I think as well, though, at the time that change got made, conditions did suit as well. Like, I know it's a cliche, and I know we don't understand the science, but it was a beautiful set of conditions for the English bowlers, the overhead conditions, and they bowled really bloody well. And almost it was swinging too much, and they had to rein it in, or maybe the ball got a bit older, or whatever it was. But for a period there, it felt completely unplayable. I mean, it was hooping around so much.
Yeah, and to add a little bit of balance to it, I think Australia were hard done by that change of ball. It clearly behaved differently to the old one, but it is still a cricket ball, and cricket is still a sport of a battle between bat and ball. So it's not like the rules of the game were changed or anything. Sure, I think the umpire, not Dharmasena, the other
Joel,
the West Indian guy.
Joel. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So when Kawaja went up to him and said, hey, this ball's nothing like the one before, he just said, oh, that's all we had in the box. Just completely dismissive of any concerns that they may have had. Joel Wilson, is it? No, I can't remember his name, actually.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's it's just part of the charm of cricket, isn't it? That these frustrating kind of quirks happen, these foibles that the umpires get to choose, and there's no kind of appeals process or whatever. One rule change that I would like to see is that I find it really tedious. The captain, and Pat Cummins did this during the English batting as well, just nagging the umpires until they keep putting it through the hoop and all that kind of stuff, and then eventually they just sort of change it. I think that this almost needs to become a thing, kind of like DRS, where you have a number of times that you can take it, once every 20 overs or something. But yeah, I feel like there's got to be a rule change, because nagging can't be the answer.
Or if you take a ball and demand that the umpire inspect it and it passes the test, then it's 5-run penalty or something against the bowling team. Five extras. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's getting silly and we're ourselves corrupting the spirit of cricket, but I agree with you. It's not the only funny little rule quirk. Couldn't help but also be amused at the Ben Stokes catch, where he leaped high at leg slip to take what appeared to be the absolutely critical wicket of Steve Smith. I think Steve Smith was on 30-odd at the time. It was off Moeen Ali. And I can't work out in my own mind, did he drop it as he was going to celebrate too early, or was it more a natural part of just bringing the ball down as he came back down to earth? Because it was a fairly spectacular piece of athleticism, as you expect from Stokes. But, yeah, there were elements of Herschel Gibbs there, weren't there?
Oh, totally, yeah. And, he must have felt sick, but not sick for too long, because I think Smith only added 15 runs, I think. But it was about 10 overs, I think, 45 minutes, something like that. I got the sense he was celebrating, to be honest. You could see the players were starting to swarm in, running in. They'd saw that it had gone into the hand. And so, yeah, he must have been, you could see he was feeling pretty sheepish. It was a fairly desperate review that I think Bairstow sort of bullied him into taking. Yeah, it was a bit of a strange one. The other thing I think or another thing that caught the eye was, I think Adam Gilchrist was on record sort of complaining about the crowds. And, at Lords and the Oval in particular, the fans are obviously in such close proximity, man. You're literally walking through them, aren't you? And, the one incident that I saw at the Oval was just a guy in the crowd sort of, as the Australians came through, was just pointing his finger going, boring.
Yeah.
You're boring. Which, to be honest with you, that seems pretty innocuous. And to give the crowd their due, when Warner and Smith were dismissed in the second innings and people have accepted that, that's probably the last time that they'll see them in Australian colours over there, they were pretty respectful. People clapped for a long time when they went back to the pavilion. And it's not like people were booing during the Australian national anthem. And the other thing, I'm sure you've got a bloody good take on this, Dylan, but there's a deep, deep irony in Australians complaining about crowds. I mean, there's 2021 racist stuff against Mohammad Siraj, 2022 Johnny Bairstow being told that he's fat and lose some weight and all that kind of stuff.
Stuart Broad in 2015 when they refused to print his name in the paper.
Exactly, just completely setting him up as this pantomime villain and making him, the public enemy number one. And yeah, look, and that was all based on the fact that he didn't walk when he nicked a ball, and this sort of ridiculous high horse haughtiness around some of this stuff. And I don't know whether it's the Australians just sort of saying something to create a headline, or whether they actually believe that the English crowds have gone too far compared to the Australian crowds. Either way, I'm finding it hard to feel sorry for them, DC.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nonsense. I worked on a Shane Bond's biography, and I'm not sure if this made it into it at the end, but he was talking about one of the first places he played overseas was at the Wacker, which is where Adam Gilchrist played a hell of a lot of his cricket. And he was fielding on the boundary, and he said this kid who cannot have been more than 11 or 12 just walked up to the boundary's edge where he was and was just yelling at him, "You're a sheep effer, you're nothing but a dirty sheep sugar," and that. And he turned around, got the shock of his life to see this kid was not even hit puberty yet and was yelling this vile abuse at him. And his parents were lying back on the bank about 10 metres back, just cracking up, just laughing. And yeah, so for the Australians now to say that, because there's a guy in the crowd going, boring, that there's somehow this line has been crossed is a little bit rich.
Waiting!
The other one that came to mind, and God, we could talk about Australian crowds forever, but I remember I think it was down in Dunedin. There was some incident where David Warner came out and said, the crowds have gone too far, and someone had said something horrendous to him or whatever. And then after a bit of digging, they realised it was actually an Australian fan complaining about how his batting was terrible. And so I thought, that kind of summed it up. The other kerfuffle, of course, floating around after this one, and there's layers upon layers of hypocrisy here. But the post-match beer incident where the Australians said that the dressing, well, of course, earlier in the series after the Bairstow palaver, Brendan McCullum came out and said this probably means that we're not going to be having a beer with them at the end of the series. And I think you and I were like, yeah, right. I mean, for a start, Vittori's in there, Jean Patel's in there, try and stop them. But anyway, it does seem that after the match, the dressing room door remained closed for quite a period of time. According to the Australians, they waited an hour and a half, knocked on the door every 10 minutes and kept getting told to go away. And now they're having a bit of a whinge. And Ben Stokes has responded, I believe.
At 4 a.m. he responded with a tweet saying, just to clarify, we met up at a nightclub. I'm not a big fan of this from England, if it's true. But there was some quite nice imagery in the story that I read as well that said Steve Smith kept poking his head round the corner to see if they're allowed to come in yet. And you can actually just picture that. It reminds me of that
video when he was stuck in the lift. It reminds me of that.
Yeah, oh, come on, guys. But, yeah, it's tricky because it was obviously Broad and Moeen Ali's moment. And they get to choose how they want to spend their last couple of hours in the changing room as an England Test player. And they might have just said, hey, look, it's nothing against the Aussies, but I just want to spend this time with the team and the family. So I can kind of understand that. But at the same time, it's not a tradition that I'd like to see go. I do like the idea that the two teams, after a hard-fought series like that, where there's a lot of crap said on both sides and there's a lot of posturing, a lot of false machismo, and that it all goes, half an hour, three-quarters of an hour after play on the last day, you get in the sheds and have a beer. And if that didn't happen, I kind of do think that is a bit of a black mark on Stokes and McCullum. And I'm not sure meeting later in a nightclub makes up for it either.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I don't understand why you can't do both. I mean, you could stay in the dressing rooms till whenever. But they could, the whole, I mean, there probably would have still been a story which would have said the Poms were in the dressing room for 6 hours and they only came to our dressing room for 1 hour.
Yeah.
But I think you and I would probably be like, oh, that is genuine whinging now. Like, pull your head in, Australia. I guess when we kind of look back on this match, Australia retain, and credit to them. And you talked about this last week and said, well, I'm maybe paraphrasing, but it almost sounded like you were sort of saying, I'm not sure if Australia have got enough kudos for what they've achieved in retaining the Ashes. But at the end of the day, it's not the same as winning. And of course, Pat Cummins and his men would have wanted to win this Test match. How do you think Australia would have felt, apart from really, really, really wanting to have a drink with Stuart Broad? How do you think they would have been feeling at the end of that Test match at the Oval?
Well, I think Justin Langer said that they can't wait to get on the plane and get out of there. 6 tests in 8 weeks. I don't think they got enough kudos for winning the World Test Championship because the Ashes just loomed over everything and dominated, I guess, the narrative. But how they're feeling, I think they'll be feeling pretty shitty about this. They finished poorly. And not at all how I expected. I actually expected Bazball to stamp on them early and Australia to figure it out. And because I believe that Australian 11, albeit Nathan Lyon was a big loss after 1.5 tests, but I felt the Australian 11, man for man, was a better team than England. And I thought they'd figure out Bazball and they would finish stronger and over the top of England. It didn't happen like that. It was the exact opposite, actually. Bazball almost out-Bazballed itself in the first couple of tests, and then they got it together, and Australia looked increasingly clueless in the face of it. And, yeah, look, they retain the Ashes. And I know, again, one of cricket's quirks is that you can't control the weather, but they retain the Ashes because it pissed down in Manchester, and for no other reason.
Yeah, a rainy day in the north of England, plus Australia retained the Ashes. Yeah,
so they won't be feeling
you.
great, is my short answer.
Nah, I think that's right. I think they'll be feeling pissed off. I think obviously they lost with 2 losses in a row, and that match at Old Trafford, which would have felt like a loss to them. I mean, I'm sure there was a few, fake smiles and so on, but not a good feeling coming out of that match. But then also, in this last test, a failed run chase, Johnny Bairstow is resurrected, and they send Stuart Broad off with a fairy tale. Well, there's a whole trio of things that they would much rather have not seen.
Yeah.
And at 135 for none, 10 wickets in hand, chasing, 384 or something. And I know it's still a lot of runs to get. I did think, jeepers, this could be a thing here. And I think that first day where they dropped a lot of catches, great bowling conditions, they'd won the toss, and they stuffed that up. They dropped so many catches, 5-6 catches, something crazy like that. And I guess when all is said and done, they still haven't won in England since Steve Waugh did it in 2001, and they've only won one of their last 10 away series. So yeah, I think they'll be feeling pretty flat. What about the Poms? I mean, obviously they've got the Stuart Broad retirement. Wokes, I thought, was absolutely outstanding. And that they're going to be going around saying that they were unlucky.
Oh, yeah.
Are all of those?
Yeah, all of those.
Is that fair?
So I was a little bit surprised by the Broad retirement. It kind of blindsided me. I half expected Jimmy Anderson to say it because he just looked so far off the pace.
Sorry, I was sorry to butt in, but did you see there was a great moment where the Australians did clap Broad on as Anderson was coming out?
Yeah.
And they sort of coaxed Anderson to go through the tunnel to sort of clap him off, and he refused to go. Yeah. I couldn't see his face whether he was laughing or fuming. Sorry. It was hard.
No, that was a great moment. And the Wokes thing is fascinating, right? He didn't play the first 2 tests. Correlation does not equal causation, as we keep saying on this podcast, but he played the final 3. They won 2 and should have won the 3rd. And I know Jason Hoyt, who can't be with us today. He absolutely loves Chris Wokes, but I've always seen Chris Wokes as the instantly forgettable wingman, and he ends up being the alpha dog in this Ashes series. There's something just so random and inexplicable about that I love. He was terrific, but yeah, I think Broad, what a way to go out, and the English love this. To talk about script writing and that. It was always Ian Botham, who writes your scripts. Stuart Broad has got that element to him. He's a fascinating cricketer. I spent a lot of my lifetime intensely disliking him for no reason whatsoever other than he was Stuart Broad and blonde and kind of carried a kind of English, not haughtiness about him, but he just seemed to be, for a long time, the embodiment of the things I didn't like about English sport. In those last few years, I actually ended up being a secret admirer of the guy. I loved watching him play, and I loved the fact he was never really particularly consistent, particularly with his bowling, that he was a burst bowler and he could be utterly ineffective for ages and then just bowl unplayable spells. And I found him a really fascinating cricketer, and I was a little bit emotional actually watching him, out to the wicket for the last time after he announced it, as you said, through the tunnel, which the Australians would have done, I'm sure, through gritted teeth. And yeah, taking that wicket, I was pleased that it was him that took the last wicket.
Oh, it was great theatre, and, to use the sort of script writing thing again, it did feel like you couldn't stage manage that better, to be honest. Just on Wokes, I saw a lovely thing from Barney Renee, who said that he described Chris Wokes as no tattoos and family friendly and the least likely Bazball member of the Bazball tribe. And I thought that was, it's pretty nice. And do forget, God, he's been in the team for 10 years. And I saw he was actually player of the series. And he's been terrible against Australia up until now. God, I did have a quick look. I know they always crap on about his statistics outside England. His average in England is under 22, and in Australia it's 52. In India it's 81, and in New Zealand it's 51. In South Africa it's 56, and in the West Indies it's 49. So it's a fair observation. The broad thing, yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I'm with you on that. You've summed it up really well. He's gone through that phase of being sort of like this petulant, annoying, self-righteous kind of schoolboy out there in the middle, and turned into this kind of admirable player with a boyish enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Kind of a sense of the sort of ridiculousness, which really is a crucial part of that English culture. And I think that he does embody what McCullum talks about. If you're not having fun out there, why the hell are you doing it?
Yeah,
and I feel like he's embraced it. And that's things like the Nighthawk. It's things like saying bowling at David Warner's really hard. It's celeb repeals. It's doing teapots. It's kind of all of that shenanigans.
Ridiculous reviews. He even did a ridiculous review on the last day too.
All of that kind of stuff, and I think I'm sure he'd think that being regarded as a villain by the Australians is a badge of honour that he wears with great pride. And even this, just thinking through, even like moving the bales around and starting to wind people up, and he's just got this sense of kind of, I don't know, it feels like we've lost a great character of the game, and I think that is a shame. But bloody good on him for doing it at the top of his game. He's a new dad. He's got a lovely pub, Dylan, that we need to go to together. I think it's called the Tap and Run in Upper Broughton, Nottinghamshire. £1 million fit out. It looks lovely. I think obviously him and Anderson have created this incredible partnership. And he did talk about how I saw he talked about Andy Caddick and Darren Goff. They were very competitive. They were often bowled together, but they were pissed off when one got a wicket and the other one didn't. And I feel like Anderson and Broad had a much more of a fraternity around it, and they're great mates and great partners. And I just think, as Mel Farrell said on Twitter, that cricket loses an entertainer with no Stuart Broad there, and so it's a shame, but bloody good on him, I reckon.
Yeah, agreed.
And I guess it kind of brings me to the I'm keen to have a chat about where does the Ashes rank in the pantheon of Ashes, because we don't follow it enough probably over the years. But I am curious about what you think the impact of the Ashes has been. It's a series that's come off the back of COVID. Test cricket is sort of seen in many quarters to be dying. England have come to the party with Bazball, and we've talked about this series being a sort of a referendum on Bazball. What's the impact on Test cricket of this series, DC?
It's twofold, actually. One's extraordinary positive, the other is extraordinary negative. And the extraordinary positive is this was just fantastic cricket. I remember the 2005 series well, and that was almost like a rebirth of Test cricket. It was more a rebirth of English cricket because it had been in the doldrums for so long, and that was important. I think this series was on a par with that series probably in terms of the excitement it generated. We're talking about it in New Zealand. We've done 4 or 5 podcasts on a series involving England and Australia, the two teams we probably like to beat the most. The terrible thing for it is I think it's highlighted the paucity of the other Test cricket that's going on. And I mean, this series is a flagship series. It's even better than your India, Australia, India, England series for the reason that both those teams can play in those conditions adeptly. I think the problem when teams go to India is they struggle so much. You don't have those leading games against touring teams now, so it's actually a bit of an embarrassment. You go there, you get thrashed by India, and you leave saying
sort of feels like a no chance situation.
Exactly. You leave and you talk about how you're going to have to prepare better next time. So this series is amazing. It happened at the same time as an India-West Indies series that I think we've talked about, where the West Indies were at home and had no access to their best cricketers. Their best cricketers were playing in the USA, they were playing in Canada, they were playing in England. So that's for me where Test cricket is. It's been incredible for the Ashes, for the legacy of the Ashes, for the marketing and branding of the Ashes. Has it actually done anything for Test cricket in general? Maybe, but certainly not the impact that you'd like it to have on a global matter. But I did pick out this piece from Paul Newman, who's a long time correspondent for cricket for the Daily Mail, and cricket's really important to the Daily Mail. It's a very Middle England paper. Its readership skews heavily towards the types of people that play cricket. And he said, he's talking about the Bazball, essentially. He said, Bazball ensured Pat Cummins was spooked from the start when he posted a deep point for the very first ball of the series at Edgbaston, one that set the tone when Zach Crawley crashed it to the boundary. Bazball has been responsible for the most enjoyable and eventful 15 months I have spent reporting on the Test team in 17 years as Daily Mail cricket correspondent. It has provided wall-to-wall drama. It has been pulsating and exciting in equal measure. More than anything, it has been great fun. Yes, this England team can still exasperate with their refusal to follow any sort of convention. I confess there were times in this Ashes for the ages when they infuriated me. Once I even wrote, there is Bazball and then there is Brainless. And I thought that was really quite nice, actually. And I think he quite nicely sums up for me the effect that Bazball has had on English cricket. Can you apply that to the canvas that is world cricket? Yeah, well, I'd like to see more teams playing in this way, but then it's not natural, is it? I mean,
no, some great lines there from Paul Newman, and it is that kind of point around aggression versus orthodoxy. And as a neutral fan, there's something amazing. It's a bit like having a bunch of bowlers that have all gone through the same academy and learned to bowl the same way. It might be really effective, but it's way more interesting to see these dudes come out of like random places and random villages and, all sorts of quirks and so on, and just sort of bring something different. And I think that's why that sort of unorthodox approach, I think, is the thing that's proven to be compelling. And he touches on it in the last lines of that, Bazball, full red line, complete and utter recklessness is really interesting, but kind of it feels doomed to fail. But a refined Bazball that gets tweaked is great to watch and really, really dangerous in terms of winning cricket. And I did see McCallum did come out and say, sometimes we got the balance a bit wrong. And I thought that was one of the first times that he sort of actually said, when teams are good enough to stand up against the sort of full noise of it, you've got to be a bit smarter. And they worked that out, I reckon, over the series. I think you said, maybe it was just before we came on air, that you thought that the Australians would work Bazball out and get better, but it was almost like it went the other way, where England tweaked Bazball to not fall into the ruthlessness trap that Australia sets for so many teams. And I did see actually that Ben Stokes has already been asked whether Bazball will work in India. And of course he said what he would always say, worked in New Zealand, did it? Well, it worked against New Zealand, sorry. Didn't work that well in New Zealand, but shit, it was good to watch. We couldn't do it against South Africa, but we tried. We couldn't do it against Pakistan. We couldn't do it against Australia. So who knows if we can do it against India? Only time will tell. So, yeah, the chat has started already. The other thing that I just wanted to, you mentioned it right at the start, was it does feel like it's been good for cricket in England. It's been good for cricket in Australia. And these series are the kinds of series that make young people, kids, this is how you get addicted. This is how you bring your mates in and go, watch this, it gets so good. But, it is pretty extraordinary when you look. There's no tests now there's no test cricket until the 14th of December when Australia play Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's insane. And if you look at the period after that, and I just did some really quick maths, New Zealand plays, in the next 12 months, New Zealand plays 4 tests at home, 0 tests away. Australia play 5 tests at home and 2 tests away against us. England play 6 tests at home against Sri Lanka and the West Indies, and then 5 away versus India. I mean, if we want test cricket to take over the world, it's got to be played a hell of a lot more than that in a hell of a lot more places.
Yeah, I know. And that's why I say I feel like this series has been incredible for the Ashes brand. I'm not sure we can extrapolate that out and say it's been incredible for the format yet.
Waiting.
We could talk about this all day, but I guess we better move on. And Dylan, I think you've been. Did you stay up? I don't even know what time the final was on. This Major League Cricket thing is kind of passed me by. I'm interested in the cricket universe that it is helping to create. I'm massively disinterested in the results, but I think you've been watching it, and I think Trent Bolt's team did sensationally well. The MINY team, I believe it's called.
The world famous Mumbai Indians of New York took out the inaugural Major League Cricket by beating the Seattle Killer Whales. Look, it actually worked. The tournament worked. It was in a short space of time. I think it was less than 3 weeks between start and finish. The crowds were good. Clearly, the crowds were heavily South Asian expats living in Texas. You can't get away from that. But Trent Bolt has just put an extra 0 on his price tag. He was incredible. He took 22 wickets in the tournament. The next highest bowler took 11. I think he averaged 10. And he was great. I mean, his last 4 games, he got 4 wickets, and he got 3 wickets in the final. The final was one off the back of a sensational innings from Nicholas Pooran. At the same time as the West Indies are getting thrashed at home by India.
And therein lies the rub, as you say, 137 off 55 balls from Pooran. He's 27 years old. 27, so hardly over the hill, and he opted out of the West Indies one-day series against India that's currently happening in the Caribbean. Now, we shouldn't forget too that only in November last year he resigned as the white ball captain. He was the captain when they had that terrible T20 World Cup where they lost to Scotland and Ireland. And I've dug out the West Indies Cricket Board press release where he was quoted, and this is what he said. "There is no doubt I remain fully committed to West Indies cricket, and I look forward to providing my services as a senior player in a supportive role." I assume he means on the field, not just sort of sending text messages through the team WhatsApp. But yeah, it's completely explainable. It's really sad. It's bad for international cricket, and it's great for professional players' bank accounts. And I guess we're just in this transition phase that we've talked about. So the only other thing I was just going to say really quickly is it's quite interesting seeing a bit of the comms and the PR and stuff around the Major League Cricket thing, desperately trying to position itself as an American league, even though all the food that you buy at the grounds is Southeast Asian. Should we put it that way? Yeah. There's no sports gambling in Texas, but the whole competition is sponsored by a Southeast Asian betting company, a major sponsor of that league. Just really desperate to try and carve out this niche as an American league. But, I think it's a little bit of a masquerade at the moment. This is a Southeast Asian product that's being built for Southeast Asian gamblers that pays international cricketers lots of money. That's how it feels at the moment. Until we see American players come through the league that become world class, which would be great. I don't know if you can be saying that this is an American league. Yeah,
so a local player was player of the tournament, which I didn't realise at the time, but this was always guaranteed. It was always going to be given to a local player. In fact, official title might have even been local player of the tournament. It was a guy called Cameron Gannon who took 11 wickets. He was born in Australia, but he's qualified for the US now, though, so they qualified him to win this player of the tournament. So, there is certainly elements of smoke and mirrors about it, but it was actually not a bad spectacle. And
as a first crack at trying to take on that US primetime market, we've seen a few of these try and fail, and it feels like this one's going to have a bit of stickability, or at least it's got deep pockets. Cool. Oh, I was going to say we should probably go, but Dylan, have you seen? I haven't checked the inbox. Have we had any correspondence?
Well, not the purest correspondence, but I did dig out something actually, and it's a series of texts between a certain BYC panelist and the one and only Scotty J. Stevenson. Would you like me to read them?
Yes, I would actually.
Okay.
I'm intrigued.
So Scotty J. Stevenson on Wednesday, June the 14th, asks, Ashes prediction, please. Debate raging at the garden shed table. To which the person he texted that to replies, 2-2, one rain-affected draw. And Scotty J. Stevenson chips back with, That is the most splinter-riddled ass-cheek prediction of all time. I like it. To which the respondent then follows up with, it's spot on, though. Last test at the Oval is going to be a classic. You should see it. I should see it? Yeah, it's going to be amazeballs. That is the correspondence.
Oh, so when I asked if we had correspondence, I was sort of thinking someone might have emailed us something through, but what you've done is gone through your phone and found a conversation that makes you look good masquerading as correspondence. Is it?
Yeah, that's probably accurate summation, yeah.
That said, that is highly impressive. And can you be honest, Dylan, when you wrote 2-2-1 rain affected draw, is this the permutation that happened in reality? Is that the permutation that you had in your mind when you were making that splinter riddled ass cheek prediction?
So you wanted me to get granular with this, aren't you? No.
Yeah.
The rain affected draw, I think I did earmark as Manchester, actually, but that's
very good.
There's no great prediction there. It always rains. But I think, as I mentioned before, I really thought that Bazball would come out of the gates and Australia wouldn't know what hit them, and I thought England would get a lead and Australia would work it out. So
sort of mow them down.
Incredible result prediction that I've got there, but flipped on its head.
Yeah, you saw it in the mirror. Yeah. I'm actually impressed. You should consider a career in sports journalism, I think.
Yeah, I might do. You never know.
How are things at the Bounce?
The Bounce is going great guns at the moment, actually. So, yeah, join the bandwagon, dylancleaver.substack.com, or just Google Dylan Cleaver The Bounce and sign up for free.
And if you haven't got your hands on a copy of Dylan's Carl Heyman book, he's probably a bit too humble to mention that, but it's a terrific read and you should get stuck into it. I'm halfway through it. It's certainly grim in places, but man, it makes you think. So get involved in that book too. On that note, we should probably head for the hills. I think that the BYC was contemplating taking a break, Dylan, but apparently the powers that be have decided we don't deserve it.
Yeah.
So we're going to be back with a vengeance over the next few weeks and really getting stuck into, I think we've got a UAE series coming up.
So much to talk about.
Which we might get out of bed for. Then we go back to England, and then there's this magnificent, huge World Cup. Kane Williamson, perhaps. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen anything from him.
I've seen footage.
And then we're into
of him batting in the nets. It looks
the
fantastic.
Summer Series. Yeah. Before we go, what's the story with that?
So he's just having throwdowns at this stage, but front foot, back foot, the trademark punch through the covers off the back foot. He looks in great nick. So
he doesn't have to be posting this either, does he? He could be quietly doing this behind the scenes. Yeah. This is not voyeur footage. This is off his official social media accounts. Can we confirm that? This is like McCartney and Ringo Starr getting together and jamming and putting it on the social media. So we thought the Beatles are back. The Beatles are back. Well, hey, one thing we would quite like is some real correspondence so that Dylan doesn't just sort of have masquerading self or whatever, gloating kind of messages. So, flick us an email to byc@beigebrigade.co.nz or slide into the DMs of the Alternative Commentary Collective or the Beige Brigade on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll get stuck into a bit more correspondence. We're looking forward to another massive few months as winter comes to a close over this side of the globe, and we get stuck into some spicy cricket over the next few months. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up with you soon.